Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. DB Frick is here. Now, DB Frick is a longtime writer and performer. He has worked alongside Martin Scorsese, Jesse Eisenberg. He was a writer, performer, and producer for the podcast The National Lampoon Presents, the final edition. And there's so much more to know about DB, about his teaching, about his acting, his performing, his networking. So, DB, glad to be speaking with you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is exciting. Thanks for
It is,
inviting.
and I'm exciting, and it's always fun to do a podcast or an interview, do a show with someone who's like off the beaten path, right? Because if you're like some accountant and you're only talking to some other accountant or lawyer on lawyer, it gets all in the inside baseball. When it's from someone like a totally different walk of life, that's where the interesting stuff happens. So what the heck are you all about? Because I don't even know where to start with your credentials, qualifications. What's the elevator pitch for Mr. DB Frick?
The quick elevator pitch. I would say, think I'm a writer, comedian. I've written jokes for Conan. I've written jokes with Tony Hendra, Mad Magazine, Cracked Magazine. That would be my quick pitch. And if I was going to pitch a script, well, I have a few. It would really depend on the producer that was there at the moment. There's probably about four things that I could pitch quickly, and depending on what they do and whether I know their genre, and then I could always change my pitch a little according to that person too, like knowing what they like can help.
I like that a lot, that you have the combination of the preparedness plus the impromptu, because you think about when you're like applying for jobs and things like that, right? You don't necessarily have just one resume. You might have like three different flavors depending on what you want to go for. And then when you know a little bit about who your target is, whether that's an employer or whether that's someone you're pitching your like sitcom script idea to or whatever, then you can just kind of finagle things. And then the end result is something that seems like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need. And he just came up with that right now. But then your secret weapon is that you kind of had the preparedness plus this kind of 2 or 3 step strategy to take it from point A to point B and say like, well, here's what I got. So it's very customized.
Yeah, I think everybody's journey is so customized when it comes to whatever they do, any genre or whatever their work is. Their journey is so customized. So everyone's story is like a snowflake, and it's different, completely different, while at the same time we're all really striving for the same things. I think we all really want the same things, comfort, living nice, and maybe maybe you want a family, maybe everyone wants a good career. People, for the most part, people want the same things, despite the fact that we are all so very individual and our journeys are so different.
That is very deep, and it hurts your brain, right? The yin and the yang of it, when it's like, and especially when you think of things like comedy, it's like the more you try to dissect it and become scientific and procedural, the less sense it makes. And then you mentioned this idea of your own story, and that's kind of a weird collection as well, because like your actual life is like a series of like days and hours, but then you choose to group and categorize and order and give more emphasis to different things. And then your story kind of becomes this like refined product of all these memories. And just all this like meta thinking, just it hurts my brain even just considering it.
Yeah, I'm not, I wouldn't even be able to repeat it. Like what I said before, I wouldn't be able to repeat that. That's how, yeah, it's somewhat deep. I, and in my essence, as a comedian, sometimes I don't want to be so deep.
Right.
Sometimes I'm really working the surface of something funny.
Okay. And that would be
Like,
fun to think about, because it's like I mean comedy is an interesting ingredient to put into anything, right? Because if you're Mr. Serious, if you're just about the facts, then it's hard to relay your message and it's hard to connect. But then if you have a little bit of that self-awareness, even if you're like an intellectual giving some like a TED talk or something, it can really make things work a lot better. And you consider some of these guys like Robin Williams or Eddie Murphy, just by they open their mouth and just like you said, I'm not even sure if they know what they're saying or what it's leading to, but somehow you laugh and you feel good. So like, what's it all about? Like what is funny and what is comedy anyways?
okay, I think if the easiest way to define comedy visually is Wile E. Coyote running, chasing the Roadrunner. The Roadrunner is able to run across no land at all. Like he's able to get to the other side and get to the other mesa just because he's so fast. So Wile E. Coyote tries to catch him, but then he's he's got 1,000 foot drop underneath him. Comedy is him looking down, noticing the drop, looking into the camera, taking out a sign that says, "Oh no," then half his body falling, his head falling, then the sign falling. That to me is the essence, and it's pretty simple. There's a lot of variables there, but it's a pretty simple explanation of what I try. Here's a sketch that I pitched for the National Lampoon a few years ago. This was when Donald Trump was president and the Million Woman March happened. So what I had Donald Trump and Steve Bannon dress up like women and go into the crowd to hit on women. So and that was the big. It got made too, but it was one of those things, and those ideas always grow too. You just have to be very open to your environment and the people around you for the ideas to really flow. I love working with a group or like a staff. I've done that a couple of times too.
I can imagine just the different people bringing different ideas and helping each other up. And you're just making me think of sometimes when, like, my wife and I are always looking for different movies to watch, right? And it's just like nowadays, it's like there's so many choices you can't even decide. And then sometimes I'll find something funny, especially I'll find something from like 80s or 90s, and I'll be like, I can't believe I never heard about this movie, and I know these actors, and I'll explain like what little I know about the plot, and I'm like, with just that little one line of the plot, like how can that not be funny? And then you think about like I was reading the other day about like The Cable Guy with Jim Carrey, and how that movie like went through all these iterations, and they kept on making it like darker and darker, and like the darker it got, the funnier it got. And so that's an exciting idea of just like re-going through, like even the Wile E. Coyote, right? Like being like, how can we add to this? How can we make this sillier, and just making it just more funny as you go? That's kind of cool to think about.
Yeah, it's absurdity. My favorite kinds of comedy are absurd and satire. So that's what I'm constantly. So a lot of times people don't really necessarily get me because you can't just live satire every day. You can't. It has to be something presented as a piece of comedy. You can't just be satire in your everyday, or people just aren't going to like you. But sometimes I'm I do that. Sometimes I'm working out the satire in real life. Almost in the same way that Curb Your Enthusiasm is a satire on life.
Yes.
So I think it plays out sort of the same way. There's so many little things that happen to us every day that we could use as storylines for things like that. And I bring up Curb Your Enthusiasm because I just watched it recently. I don't know if you watch it, but
Yes.
the comedy on it is so uh there's an effort to have the audience try to guess where the comedy's going to go. So you can sort of see where the joke is going, and the payoff is like, oh my God, that really did happen. That's what I thought was going to happen, and that's really funny. Not all comedies like that, but it's building and trying to make the audience become like a comedy detective.
Yeah, and I think about that sometimes, and I like how the satire especially sometimes sneaks up on you, and
Of course.
sometimes it's, and especially with Curb, like just the idea of something, like it doesn't even necessarily get to the punchline or the end, but just the situation that begins developing. I'm like I hadn't thought of that. How when if you park your car in this way, or if you spend 5 minutes or $5 on this, it just kind of links you to some of the situations that you're in, and it makes it even more funny, just in that sort of way. And then I've also, you mentioned how sometimes you say like a certain type of comedy is like your type, and versus might not be someone else's type. And
Yeah.
that's something else that I only recently started thinking about. Like when you watch like a movie, they'll have like a mix now of like the slapstick and the easy stuff and like the kind of the Gen Z humor seems to just be like if I reference this pop culture or I mention an app and then it kind of works its way to and then there's like the boomer or the Gen X humor like the meanness and then and sometimes it gets to me like the millennial humor and it's like I think about that like there's different flavors or like different kind of approaches you're going for.
Yeah, I think that comedy generationally is so different. I mean, I just watched an episode of Who's the Boss, and I'm like, I was laughing at that 30 years ago. And there's nothing insulting about Who's the Boss. Who's the Boss was one of the most like nobody was ever offended. Nobody ever walked away from that show offended. That's probably part of the problem, I think, what makes some shows more popular is that they're offending people and they're getting attention from that offense. I've always thought that comedy for me was like how how I see it is people all over the world. I taught a class at Cambridge, and it was kids from the age of 13 to 21, and they were all over. They were from all over the world, from Jordan to the States to Turkey to Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Russia. These kids were from all over Asia. Some kids didn't speak English at all, but I had to find like this common ground and find out what they all laugh at in their respective countries because even that is different. Like there's a lot of Hispanic comedy is very slapstick. Now a I'm not a professor of Hispanic comedy, but I've that's a lot of the comedy that I've seen. Um, even when it's in even not knowing Spanish, you could still get a lot of it because it's a lot of those comedy, like the B guy, which is old, but that was all physical. And some simple little line or something people will laugh at, something that becomes almost a fad.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think of like Mr. Bean, it was so popular because it can air in almost any country in any language because there's no speaking. It's all action.
Right. Um, when I worked at UCLA, we were taught story in such a way that you were going to tell a story without dialogue. It didn't, I mean, it could be funny. Many of the stories were funny, many of them are serious, but you tell a story in a few minutes with no dialogue, and that really challenges you as an artist to not talk and like even a mime. Like, I'm not a fan of mimes, but it's a hard gig to emote like that and then use your physical world like that. Just making like a pulling yourself on something. It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
It is just this idea of having a challenge with certain limitations, and then you can only use these tools to get it done. Like I used to struggle with writing, and it was always just like not fun at all. And I was like maybe 20 years old, and what broke through was I read some articles saying to write an article, write a blog post or something with just 7 word sentences. Every sentence you wrote had to have exactly no more or less than 7 words. And at first I hated it, but then just an exercise like that just really broke through because it kind of, I don't know, like expanded my mind or maybe like toughened me up or made me realize that I can still accomplish it even with all these limitations. And then later on, with some of the limitations removed, I'm even stronger. And now I can accomplish this thing I wasn't previously able to.
Yeah, by failing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I think
by failing safely.
I mean, that's how you become a good comedian, a good stand-up comedian, or any good at anything. You got to fail at it a lot, but I think more so in stand-up comedy, like it takes years for people to get good at stand-up comedy. And I did stand up for many years and still do it occasionally, but I can't be great at it because I'm not doing it all the time. I have to do it all the time. I think it's also important to note that this is something I live by comedically. Just because I don't find something funny doesn't mean it isn't. And I can understand why anybody finds anything funny. Like I could see them laugh at something. I'm like, okay, I don't find that funny, but I understand why they're laughing at it. If you can't do that as a comedian, I don't think you can do comedy. I think you have to be able to write beyond your like what you like. You have to be able to write for the audience. When you're writing a sitcom, you're not writing it for yourself. You're writing it for the audience. When you're writing stand-up, you're not writing it for yourself. You're writing it for the audience. So I just think that it's important to note, like, even if, and for me, if only one person laughs, let's say I got 1,000 people in a room and one person laughs, that means the joke was funny because it was funny to that one person. And that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what everybody else thinks because they didn't find it funny. That person did. So therefore it's funny. So I get annoyed when people say that's not funny because you know what it is to someone. So therefore it is. So it's so subjective that it doesn't matter what you think.
I love it that
I'm
it's
emphatic
relative.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, and I like this idea that you have here of the sort of the comedy empathy that you say, well, it's important to just be aware and expose yourself to all these different kinds of sort of flavors and all this material and know the Wile E. Coyote maybe and know the mime humor and know the Spanish telenovelas or whatever that they have that kind of has the humor mixed in. So that way, you're not just writing like for yourself, and you're not so narrow-minded, and you're not falling on all those usual crutches. And I mean, and it pays off in other ways too, right? Because sometimes you might be communicating sales presentation webinar and your audience might get excited about something and it might not be something that excites you, and there's a difference between saying something that interests someone else and you don't know why versus I'm saying this and it interests them and maybe it doesn't interest me, but at least I have the understanding and it's not just blind luck. So that's kind of cool to think about. But I also want to make sure that we talk about you and your journey, right? Because we kind of had
Sure.
some sprinkles and we definitely don't want to have like the chronological resume, but we still, since we're having this fun, kind of weird, which we plan, weird off the wall conversation about comedy and marketing, like what is your journey about and what should people know about you and just what makes you really stand out in this crazy world?
Oh, what makes me stand out? Well, I still have a talk show called Welcome Back to America. That was, I did it for 3 years. I was doing it weekly, 5 seasons, 53 episodes. And it wasn't really, it was an interview show. I did sketches, I did live interviews, I did field interviews. I went to the museums, I went to the National Comedy Museum. It was really a variety talk show. I because I had a studio that nobody was using at the time because it was during the pandemic. So nobody was even coming in and out of the studio. So I was like, I'll use it. I'll do my show from here. And it sort of kept that studio alive during that time because they might have closed were I not coming in studio doing those shows. But that my whole effort has always been to sort of be a host. From when I was 5 years old watching Johnny Carson, um, I always wanted like I wanted to originally be Ed McMahon. Like I wanted to sit next to the host because I was like, I don't know if I could be that funny as Johnny Carson, but I could be as funny as Ed McMahon. And it almost happened at a point because I was interning at Conan at NBC and Andy Richter was leaving at the time. And I sort of fill a similar look to Andy, big, heavy guy. And I remember hearing them talk about replacements. And the producers at one point were trying to talk to me about being funny. And but I was in the middle of doing my internship, so I was doing my work. So I sort of ignored them and was like they they like one of the producers put their hand out and was like, "Well, we're looking forward to seeing you around here more." And I didn't shake his hand. Like I passed his hand because I wasn't like I was focusing on the work. I knew it was happening. So I think it's a funny moment. And at the same time, it was a little moment like that that I think could have changed everything. Like, even moments in elevators, like you're talking about elevator pitches, just having moments with anybody. If you can make someone laugh in that moment, they'll probably more likely to remember you. So I try to bring that with me everywhere. My journey, though, has brought me to so many different places, doing entertainment in so many different ways, whether I'm producing, directing, writing, doing stand-up, teaching improv, um, doing extra work, doing featured work in films, doing featured work on TV, in pitch meetings or trying to get agents or whatever, all that stuff. The the journey really comes down to the opportunity to impress upon other people what you have to offer. And then
I
there's
love
other thoughts like Marlon Brando would tell you it's all horse pucky and like acting is stupid and performing is stupid. And there's also that angle where it's all like there's so much. Look at all. I mean, there's so many. I just watched not a documentary, a series about Joan Crawford and Betty Davis, and their how much they were at odds, and they did a movie together, and they tried to do a second movie together, but their lives were so similar. Um, they both had adopted children. They were both won Oscars. They were women in Hollywood at the same time, at the top of their game. And if they just took the time to get along, they probably would have lived longer lives. They would have had better work. They probably would have been able to work together. And I think everybody in their older age, it seems, thinks back on that stuff and thinks like, why did I care about that? Why did that matter? Um, but in the end, it's really just a journey to survive. You just
yes.
want to. I'm doing what I do because it's what I've been doing for more than 30 years, and I wouldn't know what else to do. Like even like I I don't know. I wouldn't know what else to do. If I didn't have it in my life in any capacity, which has never really been the case since I was a kid, since I was like 5, whether taking classes or performing, it's never been completely out of my life. So I wouldn't even know what a life like it is without.
Well, I think you're, yeah, something like that. Yeah, I like what you have going on, and just this idea of staying in the game, so to speak. And I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. Like, I'm not a comedian, performer, or anything like that, but I have probably like 4 or 5 different like blocks of skills, you could say, that are kind of like unique to me. And I kind of love what I do, and it's a form of self-expression to say, well, here's what I'm good at, and here's what I do. And sure, could I be doing all these things and all these other opportunities? Sure, but like it's the fulfillment of what I'm doing, and it's on a journey, and heck, the struggle is always there, and the you're always kind of seeing what the next thing is. But that's sort of a lot of what the fun of it is. And I like a lot of your ideas here, right? These ideas of, well, you look back now at the things that you wish you'd done differently when you were younger. Well, what's your future self going to look back at yourself now when you're in a older age and kind of nicer and saying, man, maybe I should have gotten along with that person or made different kind of decisions. And your whole your Conan story there makes me think of, like, I'm always thinking about, well, there's what I have currently going on, like my responsibilities, right? Or like when you internship, like your job duties. And then there's like the 20% of the extracurriculars, like you and me on a podcast here, right? Neither of us has to be here, but we're here because of the networking. We know it's important.
Yeah.
And I'm always worried, like, if that, so there's like 80% responsibilities, 20% extracurricular. I worry that if I widen that too much, if it's like 60-40, then I'll drop the ball on
Sure.
what I'm doing. But then I kind of think, there's probably a way to stretch myself slightly to make it like 110% total, to like hang on to my responsibilities. But then if you see the opportunity come your way and someone says, hey, you got potential, kid, like, why don't you make a little more of an effort? Go to that party, make that phone call, make an effort with that person. I tell myself to do a little bit of a stretch in order to be a better person long term.
It's about regimentation in large part. Like if you can say to yourself, I'm going to read a book a half an hour this day at this time. and, make it like, we both have heard the stories that it takes 10,000 hours to get really good at anything.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah. And that's probably true, something like that. Uh, but do like surgeons do 10,000 hours of surgery before they become a surgeon? Probably
No,
not.
right. They figure it out as they go. And like I heard a story last week about it was like two French fries is 80 calories. And so if you
What?
ate like two French fries is 80 calories with the soaking in the oil. And they were saying if you did nothing else in your life, but you just like no different diet or exercise, but you ate two more French fries, then every day those 80 calories would add up to like your weight would continue and increase. But it could also work the other way, right? You eat two less French fries, or you take 20 extra steps, it can go the other way. And I think that it's good to do these, as you said, the exercises of stretching your brain and of not speaking and doing the miming. Sometimes you just do these thought exercises to think, well, how can things slowly go bad, or how can things slowly go good, depending on these habits that I'm taking and just the person I'm forming into.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to put it. I think
Well,
that's
thank
really
you, but I am here to be amazed by you. I'm not here to
oh,
just the amazing. So, as far as your journey, your travels, your teaching, your all these opportunities, the people that you've met, would you say is there like an important life lesson to pass on to the youths today? Just is there anything that just is really profound and can really just help all of us out?
sure. I mean, I always go to very cliched things come to mind, like don't stop, keep on going. Um, you have to expect to fail over and over again at something to succeed, and even after you succeed, there's probably a lot of failures and successions coming in that whatever realm you're talking about or whatever realm you're in anyway. There's
Yes.
they you know, and there's so much luck. So much of it is luck. It's hard work and luck. Um, and timing, timing and location, you know. There used to be like I think it was a lot easier long ago, even though we have so many more ways to connect. I think it was easier long ago because you could like in the 50s and 60s, you could just go hang out outside the Brill building and talk to people and probably find a job or prove to someone, hey, look, I can write lyrics for a song or I can write a script. There's agents coming out in and out of there all the time. You can't really do that anymore. I think that the one-on-one interaction like that in person is a dying thing. There's more of this, and this is still one-on-one, but there's something to that tangible meeting someone. Like even Jimmy Fallon got on SNL in part because he used to hang out outside NBC's buildings, and just hang out there and heard about the audition and, took advantage of it. That was another location moment thing. Look what he was able to do.
Crazy. Yeah. Just that proximity factor, and the world has changed so much, and you think, well, this is increase and this is that and decrease. There's more accessibility, but there's also more competition, but there's also more ease of access. So I guess we just have to somehow navigate all of that and figure out our own proximity. But you also hear about some of these, like Justin Bieber or Taylor Swift, right? They start on YouTube and they get discovered that way. So it's just like the paths are still there. It's just navigating it and doing the work and finding the persistence. And as you said, the motivationality of it, right? Never stop, never stopping.
Right. And those are two examples. I think Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber, they're two examples of people who had a lot of money behind them before they were even famous. And Taylor was writing songs for country stars when she was 14 and 15 years old. Those opportunities are definitely, you get those opportunities because someone helps you to get those opportunities. And I think that's true with anything. Like you can go for an opportunity, you can try as many things as you want, but someone has to say yes to your effort in almost every case. Even if you're an online personality or stand up, you have to do it in every case. I try to change everything I do so much that I'm working on two books also. I'm working on one book and a play. and the play is based on some stories from a book. But it's about comedy. One of the books is called Saving Ferris. It's about a guy who was the basis of Ferris Bueller, and how John Hughes took that character from him, and then stories that this guy tells. And then in part, I talk about, I've written a couple of chapters, three, about stealing comedy and how like it happens everywhere. It's like, and it happens because those comedians who were first becoming comedians, Phil Silvers, Milton Berle, Henny Youngman, they were all stealing because they were coming from an era of being so poor. They were kids in the 20s, so they were stealing food. So then that carried over into their work and careers. They were going to steal comedy too. Why not? This is what we did with that. And I think it just became something comedians fight about all the time, but it's something that's so widely accepted. And I think that absolutely everybody is guilty of it who gets on stage. And I would catch so much flack from comedians for saying that, but I could watch one comedian's act and show them how it exists somewhere else in some capacity in comedy. So it's almost impossible to be original. Almost. I remember hearing that from Conan in 1999, watching an episode of South Park with him in the office. And he's like, South Park was able to do something that no other comedy was able to do. And this is like a new format of comedy. And there's really not new comedy out there. Even this show, he's like, even what we do here, it's all rehashed and we're, you know, trying to make old things new.
Right. That is deep. That is quite a perspective. And yeah, you think about how like Ecclesiastes itself says there's nothing new under the sun, and that was how many centuries ago?
Right.
And
It's so
and but
long.
yeah, but you hope to find like a little bit of distance, right? You hope to say, well, here's something that's proven and evolved, like say how like Seinfeld came and then Always Sunny built on top of that and other stuff like that. And you hope that maybe you say, well, I know that there's nothing completely original, but we've kind of done something more in this style or made
Sure.
our own take on it. And that's just again, that's good to think about in terms of anything like you make a product, you make an app, you write a book, you say, well, this has already been done sort of, but here's my hopefully not so stolen version of that. And so some of these things that you have going on are amazing to think about. And so how do we find out about this? How do we find out about the talk show, the YouTube channel, the upcoming projects? How do we follow Mr. DB Frick and all you have going on in the future?
I have a lot of social media. I do not have a website, but I have a lot of social media. I'm on Twitter, dbfrick, d.b.frick. If you Google that, you'll find everything that I write for a site called Stage Biz. You'll find a lot of articles I've written about theater and different comedy I've written about and different events. So I would go there. You can go to my X account, that's dbfrick, TikTok, dbfrick, Facebook, dbfrick, and of course LinkedIn, which I think is actually the best place to go. Or even go to YouTube. YouTube has a lot of my some of my best material is on YouTube, where I have a lot
Nice.
of sketches. You can see my show on YouTube. You can see my stand-up on YouTube. You can see a sitcom I wrote on YouTube. And that's Daniel Frick, DB Frick. You'll find a lot of stuff over there.
Well, you're the best kind of entertainer performer that is, and that's someone that always comes out with new material because there's nothing worse than popping in a CD or playing some stand-up comedian or watching some YouTube and you're like, I heard this in his stand-up 10 years ago. So it's always good when there's new material, and then you're also practicing what you preach as far as connecting with someone where they're at, right? Because some of the kids are on TikTok, some of them are on YouTube or LinkedIn. And so even though it is a lot of work per se to get all these platforms on there, I mean, why wouldn't you take advantage of every opportunity, especially because some people just might be X users or just might be the Facebook users. So that is an important lesson that I am absorbing from you. And so wherever you like to hang out on those socials, search DB Frick and find him. You're going to laugh, you're going to think, and you're going to find some really cool just projects he's got and things to entertain you. So any final words to say before we sign off here, Mr. DB?
I appreciate your time, Robert. This is a great interview, and I look forward to watching your program in the future.
Well, I look forward to watching yours on the many different platforms as well. So thank you for stopping by.
Thank you, Robert.